The telegram arrived at the stage-coach station in Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, 3 hours before Rebecca, Hawthorne, was scheduled to depart for Buffalo. And the station master's face told her everything she needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "Miss Hawthorne," he said, removing his hat and crushing it between nervous fingers, "I'm afraid there's been some unfortunate news from up north." Rebecca stood perfectly still in her traveling dress of deep blue wool, her trunk already loaded, her heart already sinking. She had traveled all the way from Pennsylvania, across rivers and mountains and endless plains, to marry Daniel Quinn, a man she had known only through letters for the past year. Their correspondence had begun when her cousin Martha had written to say that Daniel, a successful rancher near Buffalo, was seeking a wife. Rebecca, facing the prospect of becoming a permanent burden to her married sister after their parents' deaths, had answered his first letter with cautious optimism. That caution had slowly transformed into genuine affection, as Daniel's words revealed a thoughtful, hardworking man who dreamed of building something lasting in the Wyoming Territory. "What kind of unfortunate news?" Rebecca asked, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Daniel Quinn was killed 4 days ago, thrown from a horse that spooked during a lightning storm. Broke his neck. Death was instantaneous, according to his brother who sent the telegram." The station master shifted his weight. "His brother Darius wants you to know that the ranch will cover your return fare to Pennsylvania if you wish it, along with compensation for your trouble and travel expenses." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Rebecca gripped the edge of the wooden counter, her gloved fingers pressing into the worn surface. Daniel was dead. The man who had written to her about his hopes for the future, about the ranch he was building, about the family he wanted to raise in this vast territory, was simply gone. She had never even seen his face except for the single tintype photograph he had sent, showing a serious young man with dark hair and steady eyes. "There's more, miss." The station master looked even more uncomfortable. "His brother says if you still want to come to Buffalo, he'll meet your stage personally. Says there are matters that need discussing in person, and that you should not make any decisions until you've heard what he has to say." Rebecca took a slow breath, trying to organize her thoughts. She could return to Pennsylvania, to her sister's crowded house, where she was always one more mouth to feed, one more person taking up space. Or she could continue north to Buffalo and at least hear what Daniel's brother had to say. Perhaps there was employment to be had, or some other arrangement that would allow her to make her own way in this territory that Daniel had described with such passion in his letters. "I'll continue to Buffalo as planned," she said finally. The station master looked relieved to have the conversation over. "Stage leaves in 20 minutes, miss. I'm very sorry for your loss." Rebecca nodded and walked outside into the bright June morning. The sky stretched endlessly overhead, that particular shade of blue she had never seen back east. Daniel had written about this sky, about how it made a man feel both insignificant and important all at once. Now she would never hear his voice describe it in person. The stage-coach journey from Cheyenne to Buffalo took 2 days, bouncing over rough roads through country that grew more rugged with each passing mile. Rebecca shared the coach with a patent medicine salesman who talked incessantly about his products, a young couple heading north to try their luck in the gold fields, and a silent older woman dressed in black who might have been in mourning or might simply have favored dark colors. Rebecca stared out the window and tried not to think about what awaited her. They arrived in Buffalo late in the afternoon of the second day. The town sat in the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a main street that turned to mud whenever it rained. It was larger than Rebecca had expected, with several saloons, a general store, a bank, a hotel, and various other establishments that suggested a town still growing and defining itself. As the stage rolled to a stop in front of the station, Rebecca saw a man step forward from where he had been leaning against a post. He was tall, broader in the shoulders than Daniel had appeared in his photograph, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore working clothes, canvas pants, and a cotton shirt with a vest, and his boots were dusty from hard use. A hat shaded his face until he removed it as he approached the stage. "Miss Rebecca Hawthorne?" he asked as the driver opened the door. "Yes," Rebecca said, accepting his offered hand to step down from the coach. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked with his body every day. "I'm Darius Quinn, Daniel's brother." His eyes were the same dark brown as Daniel's had been in the photograph, but there was a wariness in them that the tintype had not captured. "I'm very sorry you had to travel all this way only to receive such terrible news." "I'm sorry for your loss," Rebecca said. "He was your brother." Something flickered in Darius's expression, there and gone too quickly to identify. "Let me get your trunk. The hotel is just down the street. I've taken the liberty of securing you a room for as long as you need it." "That's very generous, but I cannot accept such charity." "It is not charity, Miss Hawthorne. My brother made commitments to you, and the Quinn family honors its commitments." Darius lifted her trunk as though it weighed nothing and started down the street. Rebecca had little choice but to follow. The hotel was modest but clean, and the room Darius had secured was on the second floor with a window overlooking the main street. He set her trunk down carefully and turned to face her, hat still in his hands. "I know you must be exhausted from your journey," he said. "But I wonder if you might spare me a few minutes to talk. There's a restaurant next door that serves decent food, and I think we should discuss your situation." Rebecca was exhausted, but she was also intensely curious about what this man wanted to say to her. "Give me a moment to refresh myself, and I'll meet you downstairs." Darius nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Rebecca moved to the wash basin and splashed water on her face, then examined herself in the small mirror. She looked tired, dusty from travel, and older than her 23 years. Her dark blonde hair had escaped its pins in several places, and her eyes reflected the uncertainty she felt. She tidied herself as best she could and went downstairs to find Darius waiting in the lobby. He offered his arm and they walked to the restaurant, a simple establishment with checkered tablecloths and the smell of frying meat in the air. Once they were seated and had ordered coffee, Darius leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "Miss Hawthorne, I need to be direct with you. My brother's death has created complications at the ranch." "What kind of complications?" Daniel took out a loan from the bank to expand the operation. He was planning to increase the herd size, build additional structures, hire more hands. It was a sound business decision based on having a partner to help manage everything. Darius turned his coffee cup slowly between his hands. "Without a wife to establish a household and manage that side of the operation, the bank is concerned about my ability to make the loan payments. They are threatening to call in the note." Rebecca frowned. "Surely they cannot do that simply because your brother died." The loan was predicated on certain assumptions about the ranch's future productivity. With just me running everything, those assumptions no longer hold. Darius met her eyes. "I've spent the past 4 days trying to figure out a solution and I keep coming back to one option." Rebecca waited, her coffee forgotten. "Marry me instead," Darius said. The words hung in the air between them. Rebecca stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon." "I know how it sounds," Darius said quickly. I know we've only just met, and I know this is not what you expected, but consider the facts. You came here to marry Daniel and start a new life. Daniel is gone, but the ranch is still here. The opportunity is still here. If you marry me, the bank will honor the loan, the ranch will survive, and you will have the home and security my brother promised you. This is absurd, Rebecca said, though her voice lacked conviction. You cannot simply substitute one brother for another like changing horses. Why not? Darius challenged. You agreed to marry Daniel sight unseen based on letters. You were willing to build a life with a stranger. I'm offering you the same opportunity, the same future Daniel promised, the same land and home. Daniel and I corresponded for a year. We knew each other. You knew the version of himself he chose to show you in letters. Darius's voice was not unkind, but it was blunt. I'm being honest with you about exactly why I'm making this proposal. The ranch needs a wife, not for romance but for survival. In return, you get security and independence. Is that not better than returning east with nothing? Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. You know nothing about my situation. I know Daniel mentioned in one of his letters that you were living with your sister after your parents passed. I know he said you wanted to build your own life out here. I'm offering you that chance. The bluntness of it all was almost shocking. No pretty words, no false promises, just a straightforward business proposition dressed up as a marriage proposal. Rebecca should have been insulted, should have refused immediately and demanded passage back to Pennsylvania. Instead, she found herself actually considering it. What about you? She asked finally. Were you not planning to marry someone of your own choosing, eventually, perhaps? But the ranch comes first. It always has. Darius took a sip of his coffee. Look, Miss Hawthorne, I'm not asking you to decide right now. Stay in Buffalo for a week. Come out to the ranch, see what you would be agreeing to. Get to know me well enough to make an informed decision. If at the end of that time you want to return to Pennsylvania, I'll pay your way and give you enough money to start fresh somewhere. But at least consider the possibility. Rebecca studied him across the table. He was nothing like the Daniel she had imagined from his letters. Where Daniel's words had been thoughtful and sometimes poetic, Darius was direct and practical. Where Daniel had written about dreams, Darius was clearly focused on reality. And yet there was something solid about him, something reliable. 1 week, she said. I'll stay for 1 week and visit the ranch, but I'm making no promises beyond that. Relief crossed Darius's face so quickly she almost missed it. That's all I ask. I'll come by tomorrow morning and take you out to see the place. It's about an hour's ride from town. They finished their coffee in silence, and Darius walked her back to the hotel. As Rebecca climbed the stairs to her room, she felt the weight of the impossible situation settling on her shoulders. She had come west to marry one man and been proposed to by another before she had even unpacked her trunk. The whole thing felt surreal. That night, she lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the town outside her window. Somewhere a piano played, and men's voices rose and fell in conversation. This was supposed to be the night before her wedding, the last night of her old life before she became Mrs. Daniel Quinn. Instead, she was alone in a hotel room, trying to decide if she could bring herself to marry a complete stranger for the sake of mutual convenience. She thought about Daniel's letters, which she had read so many times the paper had grown soft. He had written about the Wyoming territory with such enthusiasm, about the opportunities available to people willing to work hard. He had described the ranch as his greatest accomplishment, a piece of land carved out of wilderness through sheer determination. In his last letter he had written, I think you'll love it here, Rebecca. There's a freedom in this place that I've never felt anywhere else. Room to breathe, room to grow, room to become whoever you're meant to be. Could she still find that here, even though Daniel was gone. Morning came too quickly. Rebecca dressed carefully in a practical skirt and shirtwaist suitable for visiting a ranch, then went down to breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Darius arrived exactly when he had said he would, driving a wagon rather than riding horseback. "Thought you might want to see some of the country on the way," he explained as he helped her up onto the seat. "And I need to pick up some supplies from the mercantile before we head out." They drove through Buffalo in the morning light, and Rebecca was struck by how rough and new everything looked. Most of the buildings could not have been more than a few years old, and many still had the raw look of fresh lumber. Men on horseback moved up and down the street, and women in practical dresses hurried about their errands. It was nothing like the settled towns of Pennsylvania. At the mercantile, Darius loaded bags of flour and sugar, coffee and beans, along with various tools and supplies. Rebecca noticed how the storekeeper greeted him by name, how several other men nodded respectfully as they passed. Whatever else Darius Quinn might be, he was clearly established in this community. The ride out to the ranch took them through country that grew increasingly beautiful. Rolling grasslands stretched in every direction, interrupted by stands of cottonwood trees along creek beds. The Bighorn Mountains rose to the west, their peaks still holding snow even in June. The sky was that endless blue Daniel had described, with clouds casting shadows that raced across the landscape. "Daniel loved this country," Darius said, breaking the silence. "He used to say it got into your blood, that once you'd lived here, you could never be satisfied anywhere else." "You sound as though you don't agree." "I agree it's beautiful, but I'm more practical about it than Daniel was. This land can kill you if you're not careful, whether accidents, wild animals, hostile forces. There's beauty here, but there's also danger." "Is that what killed Daniel, the danger?" Darius's jaw tightened. Daniel took a risk during a storm that he should not have taken. He was trying to bring in some horses before the lightning got worse, and he paid for it. He glanced at her. "He was a good man, Miss Hawthorne, a better man than me in many ways. More educated, better with words. He should have been the one to marry you. But he is not, so we must deal with what is rather than what should be." "Exactly." Darius sounded almost approving. They crested a rise, and Rebecca saw the ranch spread out below them. A sturdy house built of logs and rough sawn lumber sat in a small valley, with a barn, corrals, and several outbuildings arranged nearby. A creek ran through the property, lined with trees that provided shade. Beyond the immediate ranch buildings, cattle grazed across hundreds of acres of grassland. "That's the Quinn Ranch," Darius said. 320 acres with water rights to the creek. About 200 head of cattle right now, with room to expand to 500 or more once we get the loan sorted out. As they approached, Rebecca could see the ranch was well maintained. The buildings were solid, the fences in good repair, the whole operation showing signs of careful management. Two men were working near the barn, and they looked up as the wagon rolled into the yard. "That's Tommy and Frank," Darius said. "They've been with us since we started building this place 3 years ago. Good men, both of them." The ranch hands came over to be introduced. Tommy was a young man, probably no more than 20, with red hair and a ready smile. Frank was older, grizzled and quiet, but his eyes were kind as he tipped his hat to Rebecca. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Hawthorne," Tommy said. "We're all real sorry about Mr. Daniel. He was a good boss." "Thank you," Rebecca said, touched by the genuine grief in the young man's voice. Darius helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the house. "It is not much yet," he said, "but it's solid and it's paid for. Daniel and I built it ourselves, with help from Tommy and Frank." The inside of the house was simple but well constructed. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast iron stove, a sturdy table and chairs. 2 bedrooms opened off the main room, along with a small storage area. The walls were bare logs, chinked against the weather, and the floor was solid planking. It was sparse, but Rebecca could see the potential. With curtains, rugs, and the kinds of touches a woman could bring, it could be made into a real home. Daniel ordered some furniture from a catalog, Darius said, gesturing to a crate in the corner. A dresser and a washstand. He wanted things to be ready for you. Rebecca felt an unexpected pang of grief. Daniel had been preparing for her arrival, planning for their future together, and now he would never see any of it come to pass. "Can I show you something?" Darius asked. Without waiting for an answer, he led her through the house to the back door. Behind the house, a garden plot had been prepared, the soil turned and ready for planting. "Daniel wanted you to have a garden. He said you wrote to him about enjoying gardening back in Pennsylvania." She had. It had been one of the small details they had shared in their letters, the kinds of personal touches that had made Daniel feel like more than just a name on paper. "I know this is difficult," Darius said. "I know you're grieving for the future you thought you'd have. But Miss Hawthorne, Rebecca, if I may call you that, look around. This could still be yours, all of it. A home, land, purpose. I cannot offer you the romance my brother might have, but I can offer you partnership. We could build something lasting here." Rebecca turned to face him. In the bright sunlight, she could see lines around his eyes from squinting against the sun, could see the strength in his frame that came from years of hard physical labor. He was handsome in a rough sort of way, though he seemed entirely unconscious of it. What exactly would this marriage entail? She asked. "If I agreed, what would you expect?" Darius met her eyes steadily. "A true marriage eventually, but I would give you time to adjust, to get to know me. Separate bedrooms until you felt comfortable otherwise. Help running the household, managing the domestic side of the operation. Company and conversation. An honest partnership where we both work toward the same goals. And what are those goals? To build something that lasts, to prove we can make it out here, to create a legacy." He paused. "To have a family in time if we're so blessed." The honesty in his voice was almost disarming. Rebecca looked back at the house, at the prepared garden, at the land stretching away in all directions. She thought about returning to Pennsylvania, about the small room in her sister's house, about the future of dependence and insignificance that awaited her there. "I need more time," she said finally. "I cannot make this decision in a single day. Of course. Stay here at the ranch for the rest of the week. There's a spare bedroom you can use. Get a sense of what the life would actually be like." It was a bold suggestion, potentially scandalous by Eastern standards, but Rebecca found she did not care. She was already so far beyond the bounds of conventional behavior that a few more steps hardly mattered. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." The days that followed fell into an unexpected rhythm. Rebecca rose early, as did everyone on the ranch, and took her meals with Darius, Tommy, and Frank at the big table. The first morning, she insisted on cooking breakfast, and the men's surprise at having a proper meal rather than their usual rough fare was almost comical. "This is better than anything we've had in months," Tommy said around a mouthful of eggs. "Madam, if you don't marry the boss, would you consider marrying me instead?" "Shut up, Tommy," Frank said mildly, but even the older ranch hand looked pleased with the food. Darius said nothing, but Rebecca caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. During the days, Rebecca explored the ranch while the men worked. She walked along the creek, examined the garden plot, and began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. In the afternoons, she often helped with tasks around the house, cleaning and organizing spaces that had been neglected by men who spent most of their time outdoors. In the evenings, after supper, she and Darius would sit on the porch and talk. These conversations were nothing like Daniel's letters had been, but they had their own value. Darius spoke of practical things, of cattle prices and water rights, of the challenges of building a ranch in territory that was still rough around the edges. But sometimes, when the light was fading and the day's work was done, he would talk about other things. About growing up in Missouri with Daniel, about the dreams that had brought them west, about the brother he had lost. "We were not always close," Darius admitted on the third evening. Daniel was the educated one, the one with ambitions beyond just working the land. He read constantly, wrote well, thought about big ideas. I was always more comfortable with physical work, with building things with my hands, but we balanced each other out. His vision, my execution. "He wrote about you in his letters," Rebecca said. "He admired you greatly, said you were the strongest person he knew." Darius looked surprised. "He said that," he did. "He said you could do the work of 3 men and never complained about it." Daniel had a tendency to see the best in people. Darius was quiet for a moment. "I miss him. Every day I turn around expecting to see him, to hear his thoughts on something. The ranch feels empty without him." Rebecca understood that feeling. She had spent so many months imagining a future with Daniel that his absence felt like a tangible loss, even though they had never met. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Rebecca stood on the porch and watched the lightning dance across the sky, heard the thunder echo through the valley. Darius came to stand beside her, his face grim. "This is just like the storm that killed him," he said. "Same time of day, same direction, same feel to it." They watched in silence as rain began to fall, first in scattered drops and then in sheets that obscured the landscape. The cattle in the near pasture moved restlessly, and Rebecca could feel Darius's tension beside her. "What happened exactly?" she asked. "When Daniel died." Darius was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "We had horses in the far pasture. Daniel wanted to bring them into the corral before the storm got worse. I told him to wait, that it was too dangerous, but he insisted. Said the horses were valuable and we could not afford to lose any if they panicked and ran. I should have stopped him, should have insisted." His voice was rough with guilt. He was halfway to the pasture when lightning struck close. His horse reared and threw him. By the time I reached him, he was already gone. If I had been stronger, if I had refused to let him go, he would still be alive. Rebecca reached out impulsively and touched his arm. "You cannot know that, and it was his decision to make, not yours to prevent. I was his older brother. I was supposed to protect him. You are not responsible for lightning strikes, Darius. Some things are beyond our control." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. In the gray light of the storm, his eyes were very dark. "Thank you for saying that, even if it is not true." The moment stretched between them, charged with something more than just sympathy. Then Darius stepped back, breaking the contact. "I should check on the animals." He strode out into the rain without another word, leaving Rebecca standing on the porch with her hand still extended. She slowly lowered it, feeling the warmth of his skin lingering on her fingertips. That night, lying in the spare bedroom that had been meant for guests, Rebecca finally admitted to herself what was happening. She was falling for Darius Quinn. Not in the gentle, gradual way she had been developing feelings for Daniel through letters, but in an immediate, visceral way that both frightened and excited her. She was attracted to his quiet strength, his honesty, his obvious devotion to the ranch his brother had loved. She admired the way he treated his ranch hands with respect, the way he moved through the world with unpretentious confidence. And she was drawn to the vulnerability she glimpsed beneath his practical exterior, the grief and guilt he carried over Daniel's death. But was that enough to build a marriage on? Could she commit herself to a man she had known for less than a week, to a life so different from anything she had experienced before? The next morning, she woke to find Darius already gone from the house. Tommy informed her that the boss had ridden out early to check the fence lines in the north pasture. Rebecca spent the day working in the garden, planting seeds she had purchased in town, letting the physical labor occupy her hands while her mind wrestled with her decision. She was still in the garden when Darius returned late in the afternoon. He dismounted near the corral and walked over to where she was working, his boots making soft sounds in the dirt. "You have been busy," he observed, looking at the neat rows she had created. "I find gardening helps me think." Rebecca sat back on her heels, pushing hair off her forehead with the back of her hand. "Darius, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right. Why do you really want to marry me? Is it truly just about the ranch and the bank loan, or is there something more?" Darius was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "When Daniel told me he had found a woman willing to come west and marry him, I thought he was crazy. I thought no woman would actually do it, would actually leave everything she knew for a stranger and an uncertain future. But you did. You got on trains and stagecoaches and traveled halfway across the country because you wanted something more than what you had. That takes courage." He turned to look at her directly. "These past few days, watching you here, seeing how you've already started making this place into a home, I've realized something. Yes, I need a wife to satisfy the bank and to make the ranch work. But more than that, I want you specifically. I want your strength, your willingness to take risks, your ability to see potential in difficult situations. I want the chance to build something with someone who is not afraid of hard work or uncertainty." "That is still very practical," Rebecca said, though her heart was beating faster. "I am a practical man, but that does not mean I cannot appreciate other qualities as well." He offered his hand to help her up. "Rebecca, I cannot promise you romance or poetry. I'm not built that way. But I can promise you honesty, partnership, and my absolute commitment to building a good life together. Is that enough?" Rebecca took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Standing this close, she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I think it might be," she said softly. "I think it might be more than enough." Something shifted in Darius's expression, a softening around his eyes. "Does that mean you are saying yes?" "I am saying I want to try. I want to see if we can make this work." She took a breath. "So yes, Darius Quinn. I will marry you." For a moment he just looked at her, and then a smile broke across his face, transforming his usually serious features. "Thank you," he said simply. Then, more hesitantly, "May I kiss you? To seal the agreement." Rebecca nodded, her heart hammering now. Darius leaned down slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and pressed his lips gently to hers. It was a chaste kiss, respectful and brief, but Rebecca felt it all the way down to her toes. When he pulled back, his eyes were very warm. "We will make this work," he said. "I promise you that." They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who made regular circuits through the territory. The ceremony took place in the ranch house, with Tommy and Frank as witnesses, and a few neighbors who had come to pay their respects. It was nothing like the wedding Rebecca had imagined, but somehow it felt right. This simple ceremony in a log house with rough men standing witness seemed appropriate for the life she was choosing. Rebecca wore her best dress, a soft gray silk she had brought from Pennsylvania, and Darius wore his cleanest clothes, his hair still damp from washing. When the preacher asked if they took each other as husband and wife, they both answered clearly. The kiss that sealed their vows was longer than their first had been, and Rebecca felt promise in it. The neighbors stayed for a simple meal, and then they were gone, leaving Rebecca and Darius alone in the house that was now their shared home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I meant what I said before," Darius told her as they stood in the main room. "We can take this slowly. You can keep the spare bedroom as long as you want." Rebecca looked at this man who was now her husband. He had been honest with her from the beginning, had offered her a practical arrangement, and then slowly shown her there could be more to it. She thought about the way he had looked at her when she said yes, about the warmth in his kiss, about the possibility of building something real together. "I appreciate that," she said. "But Darius, I would like to be a true wife to you, not because I feel obligated, but because I want to try to make this marriage everything it could be." Surprise and pleasure warred on his face. "Are you certain?" "I am." She reached for his hand. "We have both taken a risk on each other. I think we owe it to ourselves to fully commit to that risk." Darius pulled her close, his arms strong around her. "I will do everything in my power to make you happy," he said into her hair. "That's a promise." That night, in the bedroom that had been Daniel's and was now theirs, Rebecca and Darius began the process of truly becoming husband and wife. Darius was gentle and patient, asking permission with every touch, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. There was tenderness in how he held her, reverence in how he learned the contours of her body. And when they finally came together, Rebecca felt a rightness that had nothing to do with practical arrangements and everything to do with connection. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Darius's arm around her, Rebecca said, "I think I could be happy here." "I will make sure of it," Darius promised. The weeks that followed were an adjustment for them both. Rebecca worked to transform the ranch house into a true home, sewing curtains from fabric ordered through the mercantile, arranging furniture to create distinct spaces for cooking, eating, and relaxing. She tended her garden, learning which plants would thrive in Wyoming's climate. She took on the tasks of managing the household, cooking meals, keeping accounts, and handling the domestic side of the ranch operation. Darius was gone for long hours most days, working with Tommy and Frank to manage the cattle, maintain the buildings, and handle the 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. But he always came home for supper, and he always made time to sit with Rebecca afterward, talking about the day or simply sitting in comfortable silence. They were learning each other. Rebecca discovered that Darius had a dry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable. Darius learned that Rebecca had a stubborn streak that matched his own, and that she was not afraid to argue with him when she thought he was wrong. They had their first real fight when Rebecca wanted to spend money on books, and Darius thought it was an unnecessary expense. They made up when Rebecca pointed out that her ranch needed a library, and Darius admitted she was right. Summer deepened into fall. Rebecca's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that she learned to preserve for winter. The bank, satisfied that the ranch had the stability of a married couple, approved an extension on the loan. Darius and the hands worked to bring in additional cattle, expanding the herd as planned. One evening in September, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Darius said, "I got a letter from my parents back in Missouri. They want to know about my new wife." "What did you tell them?" "That I married a woman braver than I deserve, and that she is making our ranch into a real home." He glanced at her. "They want to visit next spring if that's all right with you." "Of course it is. This is your family." "Our family now," Darius corrected. He was quiet for a moment. "Rebecca, I know this marriage started as a practical arrangement. But I want you to know that somewhere along the way, it became much more than that to me. I've come to care for you deeply." Rebecca's heart swelled. They had been married for 3 months, had shared a home and a bed in their lives, but this was the first time Darius had spoken so openly about his feelings. "I care for you too," she said. "More than I expected to when I agreed to this. You are a good man, Darius Quinn." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Daniel wrote in one of his letters that he believed everything happened for a reason. I never understood what he meant until now. As terrible as his death was, it brought you to me. I would give anything to have him back, but I cannot help being grateful that you stayed. "I'm grateful too," Rebecca said softly. They sat together as darkness fell, hands clasped, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. Rebecca thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the man she had planned to marry and the one she had married instead. Life rarely followed the plans we made for it, but sometimes the detours led to exactly where we were meant to be. Winter came to the Wyoming territory with a vengeance. Snow fell early and often, piling in drifts against the ranch buildings and covering the landscape in white. Rebecca learned what it meant to be isolated, to have days or even weeks when travel to town was impossible. She and Darius grew closer in the enforced intimacy of winter, spending long evenings by the fire, raiding, talking, and simply being together. It was during one of these evenings in late January that Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a week or so, but she waited until she was certain before telling Darius. He was sitting in his chair near the fire, reading a letter from Tommy, who had gone to visit family for a few weeks, when she said, "Darius, I have something to tell you." He looked up immediately, hearing something in her tone. "What is it?" "I'm with child. I believe the baby will come sometime in August." For a moment Darius simply stared at her. Then he set the letter aside and crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms. "Truly." His voice was rough with emotion. "Truly." He held her for a long moment, and when he pulled back, Rebecca saw tears in his eyes. "A child," he said wonderingly. "Our child. Are you happy about it?" "Happy. Rebecca, I'm overwhelmed, terrified but overwhelmingly happy." He touched her face gently. "Thank you. For this, for everything, for giving me a family when I thought I had lost the only family I had." Rebecca felt her own eyes fill with tears. "We're building something together, just like you said we would." The winter seemed longer after that, with Rebecca anxious to feel the baby move, to have confirmation that everything was progressing as it should. Darius became almost overprotective, insisting she rest more, do less of the heavy household work. Rebecca tolerated it because she understood it came from love, not from a desire to control her. Spring arrived in a rush of snowmelt and new grass. Darius's parents arrived in April, a weathered couple who had clearly spent their lives working hard. They were cautious with Rebecca at first, uncertain what to make of the woman who had married their son so suddenly after agreeing to marry Daniel. But Rebecca's genuine warmth and the obvious happiness she and Darius shared won them over quickly. "You're good for him," Darius's mother Margaret told Rebecca one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. "He was always so serious, even as a boy, but he smiles now. I see it in his eyes when he looks at you." "He's good for me too," Rebecca said. "I did not expect to find love when I came west, but that's what this has become." Margaret patted her hand. "Love takes many forms. Sometimes the most lasting love grows slowly from respect and partnership and shared purpose. That's what you two have, and it's a strong foundation." Darius's parents stayed for 2 weeks, helping with spring work and getting to know the ranch. They visited Daniel's grave in the small cemetery in Buffalo, and Rebecca went with them, standing beside Darius as his parents said their farewells to their younger son. It was a somber moment, but also a healing one. The day before his parents left, Darius's father took him aside for a private conversation. Later, Darius told Rebecca what had been said. He told me Daniel would have been happy that I married you. That Daniel always wanted me to find someone who would stand beside me, not behind me. He said I've built something Daniel would be proud of. You have, Rebecca said. We both have. Summer came on hot and dry. Rebecca's pregnancy progressed, her belly growing round with their child. The other ranchers' wives in the area, women Rebecca had met during infrequent trips to town and at church services, offered advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. A community was forming, and Rebecca was becoming part of it. In August, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat made the air shimmer, Rebecca's labor began. Darius rode to fetch the doctor from Buffalo while Tommy's wife Martha, who had experience with births, stayed with Rebecca. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Darius paced outside the bedroom, helpless and terrified, while Martha and the doctor worked. Finally, as the sun was rising on the second day, the sound of a baby's cry filled the house. Darius burst into the room to find Rebecca exhausted but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. "A son," she said weakly. "We have a son." Darius approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the tiny red face of his child, at the small hands waving in the air, and felt his heart expand in ways he had not thought possible. "He's perfect," he whispered. "What should we name him?" Rebecca asked. Darius had thought about this many times over the past months. "Daniel," he said. "If you agree, I'd like to name him Daniel after my brother, Daniel Thomas Quinn." Rebecca smiled through her exhaustion. "Daniel Thomas Quinn, it's perfect." The doctor cleared his throat. "Congratulations to you both. Now, Mr. Quinn, your wife needs rest and the baby needs to eat. Let's give them some space." Darius bent to kiss Rebecca's forehead. "You were so brave," he said. "Thank you for our son." Rebecca watched him leave the room, her heart full. Little Daniel was already nuzzling at her breast, and she guided him to nurse, marveling at the tiny perfect miracle she and Darius had created together. The months after Daniel's birth were exhausting but joyful. Rebecca learned the rhythms of caring for an infant while also managing the household. Darius was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, holding him, talking to him, showing him the ranch that would one day be his. On one of these occasions, when Daniel was about 6 months old, Rebecca found Darius in the barn, holding the baby while pointing out the horses in their stalls. "Teaching him the family business already?" she asked with a smile. Darius turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Got to start early. This ranch will be his someday, his and his brothers and sisters if we're blessed with more." "More?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Let me recover from this one first." Darius laughed, and Rebecca marveled at how much he had changed from the serious, grief-stricken man who had met her stage coach that day in Buffalo. Love and fatherhood had softened him, brought out warmth and humor she suspected even he had not known he possessed. Life settled into a new normal. The ranch prospered. The loan was paid down steadily. Tommy married and brought his wife to live in a small cabin they built on the property. Frank stayed on as foreman, becoming as much a part of the family as an employee. The community around Buffalo grew and became more established. Rebecca wrote regular letters to her sister in Pennsylvania, telling her about her life in Wyoming. The responses she received painted a picture of a very different existence, one bound by social conventions and limited opportunities. Rebecca did not regret her choice to come west, not for a moment. When little Daniel was 2 years old, Rebecca became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier and the birth, while still difficult, was faster. They welcomed a daughter in the spring of the following year, naming her Sarah Margaret after both their mothers. Darius was utterly besotted with his daughter. Rebecca often found him holding Sarah, singing to her in an off-key voice, or simply watching her sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. "I never knew I could feel this much," he told Rebecca one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching Daniel play in the yard while Sarah slept in her cradle. "Before you came, my world was just work and survival. Now it's full of love and laughter and purpose beyond just keeping the ranch going. That's what family does," Rebecca said, leaning against his shoulder. "It transforms everything." The years passed in a blur of work and growth, challenges and triumphs. They added onto the house, creating more room for their growing family. A third child arrived, another son they named James, and then 2 years later, twin girls they named Emma and Grace. The ranch house that had once seemed too large for just 2 people was now bursting with noise and life. Through it all, Rebecca and Darius's partnership deepened into a love that was both passionate and comfortable. They had their disagreements, as any couple did, but they always worked through them. They had learned early on to communicate honestly, to trust each other's judgment, to lean on each other when times were hard. One evening, when Rebecca was 40 and Darius was 43, they found themselves alone on the porch for a rare, quiet moment. The children were all inside, the older ones helping get the younger ones ready for bed. "You ever think about how we started?" Darius asked. "About that proposal in the restaurant when we barely knew each other?" "Sometimes," Rebecca admitted. "It seems like another lifetime." "Do you ever regret it? Regret saying yes to such a crazy proposal?" Rebecca turned to look at him, at this man who had given her a home, a family, and a love she had never imagined. His hair was now streaked with gray, and lines of work and weather marked his face, but his eyes were still as warm as they had been on their wedding night. "Never," she said firmly. "Not once, not for a single moment. You have given me more than I ever dreamed of having." "You saved my life, you know," Darius said quietly. "After Daniel died, I was drowning. The ranch was failing, I was lost in grief. I didn't know how to move forward. You gave me purpose again. You gave me reasons to build and dream and hope." "We saved each other," Rebecca corrected. "I would have returned to Pennsylvania to a life half-lived, always wondering what might have been. Instead, I have lived fully every day since I chose to stay." Darius pulled her close, kissing her with the ease of long familiarity and the passion that had never quite faded from their relationship. "I love you, Rebecca Quinn. I think I started loving you that first day, watching you plant seeds in Daniel's garden, choosing to stay even though you had every reason to leave." "And I love you," Rebecca said. "I loved Daniel through letters, but I love you through experience, through building a life together, through every joy and hardship we've shared. This is real, Darius. This is exactly what I came west to find." The door opened behind them, and their oldest son, now 14, stuck his head out. "Ma, Pa, the little ones want a story before bed. Will you come?" Darius and Rebecca exchanged a smile, then rose together to go inside. Their house was full of the sounds of children, full of love and chaos and the beautiful ordinary moments that made up a life. As Rebecca told the story and watched her children's faces, she felt Darius's hand find hers in the dim light, felt the solid strength of him beside her, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own mix of challenges and blessings. Daniel grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father and uncle had. Sarah developed a gift for working with horses that rivaled Darius's own. James showed an aptitude for numbers and took over keeping the ranch accounts. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief together. Through droughts and good years, through hard winters and beautiful springs, through the small triumphs and occasional tragedies that made up life in the Wyoming Territory, Rebecca and Darius stood together. Their love, which had begun as a practical arrangement born of necessity, had grown into something deep and unshakable. When Rebecca was 52, they received word that Wyoming had achieved statehood. The wild territory they had helped settle was becoming something more permanent, more established. That evening, standing on their porch looking out over land they had worked for nearly 30 years, Darius said, "We did it. We built something that lasted." "We did," Rebecca agreed. "And it will continue after we're gone, through our children and their children. This is our legacy, Darius. The Quinn Ranch, but more than that, the family we created." Darius wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I think Daniel would be proud of what we've built, not just the ranch, but the family, the life." "I think he would be," Rebecca said. She had long since made peace with the strange path that had brought her to Darius. Daniel's death would always be a tragedy, but it had also been the beginning of something beautiful. In a way, he brought us together. His dreams for this place, his letters that brought me west. We're living the life he imagined, just not in the way anyone expected. "Everything for a reason," Darius quoted, remembering his brother's words. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Rebecca leaned back against her husband's solid warmth and felt profound gratitude. She had come west as a frightened young woman to marry a stranger, and instead had found a partner, a love, and a life beyond anything she had imagined. The house behind them was full of noise as their children, and now their oldest son's wife prepared supper. Soon there would be grandchildren, another generation to carry on the Quinn legacy. The ranch that had been carved out of wilderness through determination and hard work would continue, a testament to what could be built when two people chose to trust each other and work toward a common dream. "Thank you for asking me to marry you that day," Rebecca said softly. "Thank you for giving me the chance to say yes." "Thank you for being brave enough to say yes," Darius replied. "You're the best decision I ever made, Rebecca Quinn." As darkness fell and the stars emerged overhead, they went inside together, hand in hand, ready for whatever the future held. They had built something lasting, something true, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had transformed a practical arrangement into a love story for the ages, proving that sometimes the best love stories began not with passion but with partnership, not with romance but with respect, and not with promises but with the choice to stay and build a life together. The Quinn Ranch prospered for generations, and the story of how it was saved by a brave young woman who came west to marry one brother and ended up marrying another became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and firesides. But to Rebecca and Darius, it was simply their life, the beautiful ordinary miracle of choosing each other every day for 30, 40, 50 years, until the end of their days. And in the Wyoming they had helped settle, their love became part of the landscape, enduring and true, a testament to the power of taking risks, choosing hope, and building dreams together.